All right, all right. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Ovaya Inspiración. I am here with a special guest, Angela Harders. But before we get into it, let me just give you a basic intro of who she is, and then she'll just go from there. So she is an ex-teacher. She's a best-selling author, unschooling mom, and director of PAX Academy and Peaceful World Schoolers. But we'll talk about more of that in depth in a different live because today we're going to talk about a little bit about your story and whatnot. But before we get in, for anybody that is watching or post watch, some parts may be triggering, so if you need to step out, please do so, because this is a tragic story. But behind that tragic story, there's also beauty in it and what God has done and can do. So I will just let Angela introduce herself more, and then we'll spotlight you.
All right. First of all, thank you so much for having me as a guest on your podcast. I'm honored to be able to share a little bit of our story and the things that God has done over the years. You had asked me to be a guest on here to share about my story. I had shared a video on TikTok about a situation that had happened with me where I actually got pregnant as a result of a rape. And I ended up choosing to keep my daughter and raised her on my own. And now she is almost 10 years old. So, yeah.
All right. Awesome. So we're going to get into that because this is a very, touchy subject. And I know the topic of reproductive rights and abortion comes in. And given that the election is 19 days left for voting, and that topic is always, on top.
Yeah.
But can you just give us a little bit of background of yourself, your childhood, where's your family from, nationality, and, all that stuff?
Sure. So I was born and raised here in Silver Spring, Maryland. My mom is Italian and my dad is German. Both of their parents were born overseas. And I tell everyone I am the gringa con un corazón latino. I wish I was Hispanic so bad, but I am not. I do speak English and Spanish, but my parents have always been involved in the pro-life movement here in Washington, D.C. I tell people I literally was born at the same time that the pro-life here, because one of the first pregnancy centers that opened up here in Maryland where I live, it was started in 1987, the same year that I was born. So, and my dad was the vice president of the board for that pregnancy center. So I literally have grown up in the pro-life movement here in Maryland.
Wow, that's very interesting. And how is, have I been? I've been to Maryland before. I think it's called, what's the beach area? Ocean City, Ocean. What is? Yeah, I've been there one time for like a conference when I used to be part of this MLM. But it was fun. It was interesting, and that's where you currently are right now, right, Maryland?
Yeah. Yep.
And how's that over there? You love it?
Yes and no. There are things that I love and things that I definitely wish I could change, but I'm grateful. I'm growing where I'm planted. I'm learning to grow where I'm planted. So yeah.
Okay. All right. That's awesome. That's awesome. So, and you were born in 1987. So that means I'm older than you. My gosh, bro. I feel so old. Just by 1 year.
Well, you don't look old, so that's all that matters.
That's true. Even though I have a lot of grays, but I love my grays. It's funny because I always say that my father passed away when I was 25. He was 70 and he had full blown white hair. He had me when he was 45.
Oh,
I never
wow.
met my father. I never met my father having like dark black hair. He was already pure white, So I'm like, man, this is the inheritance you leave me, that white all the way down. But I love it though. I love it. Awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah. All right. So let's dive into your story. And I guess, talk about it.
Yeah. So I I grew up in the 1990s when we're kind of like in the heart. I don't know if you're familiar with like the Christian purity culture, if that was
Oh,
like a
wow.
thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then Joshua Harris and all that stuff, I know.
Yeah. So Joshua Harris is actually my pastor.
You know that because
Yeah, he was the pastor of my church. And for those of you that are listening and may not be familiar, Joshua Harris was the man who wrote the book I Kissed Dating Goodbye. And that book was wildly popular in the 1990s. And there were a lot of ideas around just purity and saving yourself for marriage. And so that was something that was really important to me. And I really wanted to save myself for marriage, and I was so deeply committed to that I actually wanted to save my first kiss for my wedding day. That was like the epitome of, Christian purity, was to not kiss anyone until you got married. And so that was kind of my plan. I was a public school teacher at the time, and I had been, again, saving myself, and I actually was teaching fifth grade, which is when they do kind of the sex education in the public school system. And so part of my job was talking to fifth grade students about sex and purity and saving yourself for marriage. And so, I mean, you can imagine my shock when, this very open advocate for purity and all of those kinds of things. Now I found myself pregnant, clearly without having a boyfriend. And it was just like, oh my gosh, how am I going to explain this to everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So you went through that fifth grade. Ooh, that's that. I mean, I don't know how it was back then, but I know now fifth grade is rough. They think like they know it all. Because I work with all grades from fifth grade all the way to high school. I work for a nonprofit organization, and we teach, at least me specifically, my department is all youth, and we focus on healthy relationships and they're important from making healthy decisions with everything. I'm talking about from romantic relationship to friendship with yourself, with your finances, all that. We talk a lot about friendship, love, and dating, relationship red flags. So we talk about all of that stuff, and it's great. It's great. You learn a lot from these kids, and then unfortunately, they learn from TikTok and all these music media and artists. I'm like, my gosh, but I'm just there doing the Lord's work, right? So, all right. So you were a teacher, and you no longer are a teacher. So what are you doing now?
So I actually left my job as a teacher in 2021, and I published my best-selling book, Tales of a Toxic Teacher, exposing the cycles of abuse within our schools. And after that, I started helping families to homeschool their kids. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. I started a private school for homeschooling families. Wow. And that's what I do now. I run that private school.
That's interesting. And we're definitely going to talk more about that in the next live whenever we schedule that date, because I really
yeah.
to that. So you talk to us about romantic relationships. And what did that look like for you? How did that lead up to the situation you went through, or what age you were in? So all of that.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, I don't even know how old I am right now. I think I'm like 35, 36 now, but I stopped counting after 30. I was like, we're gonna not keep track of how old I am now. So I actually the guy who raped me, he was a relative of a friend of mine. And so he was someone that I knew. Obviously I did not expect that this would happen to me at all. It was really a shock. Prior to that happening, I hadn't dated, I didn't date, all through middle school, high school. Like I said, I grew up in that purity culture. So it was all about saving yourself for marriage and things like that. And so, yeah, I didn't really have a lot of romantic relationships at all. And then this happened. So, yeah.
Okay. So being in that situation, were you in a relationship with that person, or okay, so talk to us about that.
Yeah, so he actually had a girlfriend at the time. I knew who he was, but I we weren't really friends or anything like that. Like I said, he was a relative of a friend of mine. He did have a girlfriend, and I don't know. It's really like, it's something I don't really like remembering, like the details about like what happened. I don't really like to talk about the details about what happened. And I know this might sound a little bit crazy, but like after like the actual act of it happening, I don't remember. I wasn't able to remember it for a really, really long time. And I know it sounds kind of weird. It was something that I actually like talked about in therapy, because like the actual act of it happening, I didn't remember it like within my body. I was like on the ceiling watching it happen to me, if that makes sense.
Wow.
Like, and I don't remember how I got home. I don't remember how we got there. Like everything around what happened, my brain has just kind of like blocked it out. And for a long time, I was really like, am I crazy? Like, am I losing my mind that I just don't remember what happened? I do remember that he promised that he wasn't going to do anything to hurt me. And then he like closed the door and just kind of, you know, did his thing. And then after, like the moment he closed the door, locked the door, after that moment, I'm not like in my body anymore. Like I'm watching it happen from the ceiling. I know that sounds really weird. But yeah. And then after that, I don't remember like getting home. I don't remember anything like that. After that, I did not like talk to him or speak to him. I just kind of tried to like move on with my life as though nothing had happened. I didn't tell anyone about what had happened. It was really like a shocking and scary thing for me. And yeah, so that was just kind of like what happened. And so it wasn't when it was during the first week of school, and I hadn't got my period, and I was like, what is happening? Like, why my period is always on time? Why isn't it here? And then I was like, I just had this feeling like I should take a pregnancy test. And so it was before the students had actually gotten there. So I was in my classroom. I was like setting up my classroom for the start of the school year. And when I was setting it up, I was like, okay, I'm just going to go take a pregnancy test so I can take this out of my mind. And I took the pregnancy test, and as soon as I took it, it was positive. And I was like, oh my gosh, like how the heck, like I have, I was like, I have worked my whole life to like be this example of, you know, purity and saving myself and all these things. And then now this, like, I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. And my knee-jerk reaction was, I can't do this. Like I have to get an abortion. Like there's no way that I can go through with this. And so that was the first thing that I did. And it's crazy because I knew what I was doing. Like I wasn't the kind of person who was scheduling an abortion because I just thought it was a clump of cells. Like I believe very strongly, like life begins at the moment of conception, and that God is the person who creates life. And that life begins at the moment of conception. And I knew that I was going to make an appointment to do that, like to end the life of my child. And so that happened on a Tuesday when I found out that I was pregnant. I called Planned Parenthood immediately. And the lady who I spoke to on the phone, you know, they ask you questions about, you know, like what's happening and why you're scheduling your appointment. And I just told her, I was like, you know, that I was raped and this happened to me and I can't be pregnant and I can't handle this. Like, this is like an absolute nightmare. I feel disgusted. You know, I feel terrible. I don't want to go through with this. And you know, I was like, I had all these dreams. Like I wanted to be a missionary. I wanted to travel the world. I wanted to, you know, do all these things. And I just was like, my life is over. You know, I can't go through this. And so she said, don't worry, we'll take care of the problem for you. She said, we can't do it right away. In our state, that we had to wait a couple days, like you couldn't get, you know, the next day. And so she said, the earliest we can get you in is Friday. So I said, fine. So I called on Tuesday, booked the appointment for Friday morning. And then that was it. I had my appointment scheduled Friday morning. I was going to, you know, have an abortion and I was going to move on with my life again, like nothing had happened. And on the entire day Wednesday, I could not do anything. I couldn't set up my classroom. I couldn't focus. I just cried. You know, the whole time I was terrified. I felt so guilty because I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I felt like I didn't have any other choice. I felt like I didn't have any other options. And so that evening, I was like, I need to talk to someone who I know is going to be able to help me. I did not feel like I could speak to anyone in the state of Maryland because my dad was the vice president of a pregnancy center here in Maryland.
No way.
Yeah, and so I was like, if I talk to anyone in our area, they're gonna know who I am, and they're gonna tell my dad, what happened. And so I was like, I can't talk to anyone here. And so I Googled a pregnancy center in New York. I was like, well, that's far enough away. Maybe they won't recognize me there. And so I called this random pregnancy center from New York, and a lady answered the phone. And when she answered the phone, I couldn't even talk. I was just crying. And she said, she was like, take your time. I'm here with you whenever you're ready. Like, I'm here to listen. It's all right. I'm here. And so I just kind of like cried. And then when I was able to collect myself enough to speak, I shared with her what happened. I said, I was raped. I found myself pregnant. I'm in this terrible situation. I just scheduled an abortion appointment. I'm going to end my child's life in 2 days. And I feel terrible. I don't know what to do. And the lady responded and she said, Angela, sex doesn't make babies. God does. And she was like, there are women all over the world that have sex over and over and over, and they never get pregnant. And then she said, there on the flip side, like there are women who, it happens one time and they get pregnant. And so she was like, the act of having sex isn't what creates a baby. Only God is the giver of life. And so she said, for some reason, God is choosing to give you a life out of this terrible circumstance. Wow. And the moment that she said that, it was like this overwhelming sense of peace just came over me. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like, it's what happened is not what created the life. Like, God is the person who created the life that's inside of me. And I don't know why I got pregnant through this, but I know that he has a plan and a purpose for it. And so that conversation was really transformational for me. Thanks. That conversation was really transformational for me. And it was at that point, in fact, at that point, I hadn't even decided that I was going to like keep her. I was still wrestling, but just the words that she said just stuck with me. Like, God has chosen to give you life for a reason. And so Thursday, I was just kind of wrestling within my spirit the whole day, again, feeling this countdown of like, okay, I have a couple hours left to make a decision. And then Friday morning, I woke up and I just felt sick to my stomach. And I was like, I cannot go through with this. I know that this is wrong, and I will regret this choice for the rest of my life if I go through with this. And so I called Planned Parenthood, and I told them that I was calling to cancel my appointment. And the same lady who booked my appointment was the lady who answered the phone the second time.
Wow.
And and she was like, oh, I remember you. And she just, it was so crazy. Like, the difference between the two calls, like when I was telling her that I wanted to cancel, she was like, are you sure that you want to go through with this? And I wasn't sure. I was like, I don't know. And she just said, we can take care of this problem for you, and no one will ever have to know.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And those words were, I will never forget that. I mean, she just was like, we could take care of this problem. No one will ever have to know. And I responded to her, and I was like, but I would know, and God would know. And that's enough for me. And, and she told me, she was like, if you go through with this, you're never going to be able to be a missionary. You're never going to be able to travel the world. I wanted to be a missionary in Latin America. And she was like, in Latin America, like, they don't accept single mothers very well. It's not like how are you going to go there as a single mom and try to pretend to be a missionary? Like they're not going to accept you very well there. And, and she just said, again, we could take care of this problem for you. And I was like, nope. And so I said, you can.
So in other words, they weren't providing you different options.
No. Like, in her mind, abortion really was the only solution. It was like, oh, you're in this terrible circumstance. Well, just get an abortion. No one will know.
Wow. My goodness. I want to backtrack a little bit before we go forward. So when he did that to you, what happened afterwards? Did he try to continue? Nothing?
No.
Nothing ever happened.
Yeah.
Wow. And man, that's just trying to fit that in my brain, but it's tough. It's tough. Did his girlfriend ever find out?
So she did eventually. Obviously, his relative was a friend of mine, and we met through the school that I was teaching at, actually. And so, when my students found out that I was pregnant, word got back to him, and at that point, like, his cousin reached out to me and she was like, he did this, didn't he? And I was like, yeah. And she just said, yeah, he's kind of been known to just be forceful with women. And she just apologized. She's like, I'm so sorry that this happened to you. But yeah.
The thing that blows my mind, I mean, I don't know how he was with his girlfriend, but my question that comes to my mind is that, why did he decide to rape you and not her? Not that he should have raped her anyways, but why to you and not do anything to her, which is a weird thing. When he was the girlfriend, you were just not in nowhere near of a romantic relationship or anything like that with him.
Yeah, I think that they were having problems or something in their relationship. I don't know if he did that to try to like get back at her. I don't know why he chose to do what he did. And it's crazy because I had specifically told him, like, hey, I'm not interested in you, like, for a lot of other reasons. I don't want to speak poorly like that, but there were a lot of reasons, like, I was like, I'm not interested in you like that. And he like laughed at me and he was like, I have a girlfriend. I'm not like that, and I was like, okay. So I just didn't see it coming at all. Cause I mean, you literally just was like, I have a girlfriend. And I was like, okay, I'm not, I'm not interested in you like that at all. And he was not a Christian. He was not any like someone that I was interested in. So it just really surprised me. I don't know. And then he ended up like breaking up with her afterwards. They had a really, really toxic relationship. And actually that was my first encounter with him, was him like coming over to my friend's house and, slamming all the doors because they had gotten into a fight, and he was complaining about how, he called the police on her. And I think they just had a toxic relationship outside of things. But the little bit that I knew about him was that just he was troubled and she was troubled, and I don't know much about their relationship, to be honest.
Yeah. And did you ever at some point report it to the police what happened to you?
So I did. I spoke to the police about what happened, and they basically told me, they were like, if you would like to get child support, then you should press charges. But they said that if you press charges, then you will be basically legally attached to him for the rest of your life. And they said that the courts here in Maryland, they tried to make a distinction between the way that a man is with the mother versus the way that a man is with the children. And basically, like, it doesn't really matter the way that his relationship was with the mother. If he hasn't harmed the child, then he as a father would still have rights to the child regardless of his relationship with me. And so, so that's kind of the way that the law was here. And so he was basically like, if you want to have child support, if you want to follow through with this, you can press charges. They said that it's very hard to like prove cases, because obviously with rape, it's a case of intent, like he said, she said, and so they said it's very difficult to prove. You can prove that he's the father, but you can't prove like consent, if that makes sense, because there's no one else that's there.
There's no.
Yeah, so they said it's very difficult to prove, and in the end, he would still have rights to her. Even if he was convicted, he would still have rights to visitation and things like that. And so at that point, I was like, I would rather just have, again, move on with my life without him. I don't want to be tied to him for the rest of my life. I don't want to, have to deal with him for the rest of my life. I'd just rather move on. So that ultimately that was what I ended up doing. I just moved on.
Wow. And what about your church family when they found out? How was that? Were they supportive, or did they look at you a certain way? Because fortunately, church folks can be ugly that way too. But what was going on there when they found out?
My church family, they were very supportive. They were really, really great. I was very surprised. I was a little bit nervous to share with them. Obviously, I didn't share with everybody like the details of what happened, but with my pastor, I did talk with them specifically about what happened, and they were like able to offer counseling for me, which was really helpful. And then as kind of time went on, like they just were a part of our journey. Like I remember for Christmas one year, they like wrote a check to all the single moms in the church to help us with like getting Christmas presents for the kids. And so things like that were just like a real blessing. And they would pray for me, and like they came and visited. And so, yeah, they were great. They were like loving and accepting, and yeah.
That's awesome. Praise God. Yeah, because I was like, hold on, she's pregnant. Everybody knows that you're single, or at least you're single, right? And you're, the purity culture that time and all that. So I wonder what's going on to their minds. I'm like, wait a second, did she fall into sin? There's something there. But I'm glad that
that was a big fear of mine. That was a big fear of mine. Was this dichotomy of like, if I tell people the truth about what happened, they're gonna judge my daughter. But if I don't tell them the truth about what happened, then they're going to judge me, and
never heard of that. So why would they, and I guess in your mind, why do you think they would judge your daughter?
I mean, they did.
Wow, they did. Yeah, so why? Did. I don't understand.
Like I would get comments like, how could you keep the rapist baby? How could you keep the rapist spawn? They would say things like that. They're like, his face is going to haunt you every time you look at her.
Oh my goodness. How you say? Okay. All right.
Yeah. But people would say things like that. And so that was really like hard to hear. There were people that told me that it would have been better if I would have followed through with the abortion, because they said that every child deserves to grow up in a home with a mother and a father, and that they're like, oh, it's selfish for you to keep her when you can't give her a mother and a father. Wow. So yeah, people had really not nice things to say.
That's just cruel to say something like that. Like you're supposed to be lifting you up, and here you're saying, this and that, and this is just a little girl or a baby. Like, nah, man, that's just wrong. So what about, okay, so fast forward, right? You still have not given yet. When did your father find out?
Not for a long time. I think I was maybe like 6 months pregnant, 5 or 6 months pregnant when I told him. I didn't tell them for a long time. I just was really scared, and then of course, eventually I was like, well, I have to tell them eventually. And so I told both my mom and dad at the same time. Actually, I was here in this house, and we were outside on the deck, and I shared with them about what happened, and the response of my parents, it was really, really different. My dad was fantastic. I knew he would be. My dad just stood up from the table, and he came over, and he was like crying, and he just hugged me. And he said, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this. You're not alone. My mom's response was very different. My mom was really, really, really angry. She was really angry. She was really angry at me. She asked, why I didn't tell them sooner. And at the time, it was really hurtful. Like, she was just like, how could you be so stupid? Yeah. How could you do this? How could you like lie and not tell us for so long? And
it was, and you know what? To be fair, like in a way, she was not wrong, because she was feeling all those emotions. Like, that's my daughter. Like, she went through this, and why didn't she? Maybe I don't know, maybe she felt some type of way because, you're the daughter and, why did you just come up and tell me? But, she didn't understand that that's not something that's just so easy for you to just, oh, let me just tell my parents what happened to me. Like, there's a fear on but I understand her part as well, and it was rough, so yeah, so she was angry, upset, and all that.
Yeah,
And
at the time I didn't understand, but now, like, being a mom, looking back, I totally get why she would feel that way. Like, I would be devastated if my daughter had gone through something so terrible like that and didn't feel like she could trust me to share with me about what had happened to her. So I get it now, but in the moment, it was really hurtful, for me. It was really hard to just, hold space for her anger when I was, processing all my own emotions at the same time. But yeah, eventually they kind of came around. It was like a very weird kind of pregnancy, in the sense that, like, I didn't know how to handle it. Like most people, when they're pregnant, like, you celebrate it and you have a baby shower and there's presents, and there's like this celebration of life and anticipation of, the life to come. And so it's kind of weird, like, how do you celebrate this life in light of everything else, in light of all of the circumstances around it? But I just prayed and I asked God, to help me to view my daughter as like a gift from him, rather than, the circumstances around her conception, and to be able to celebrate her as a part of me. Not just like the rapist spawn or whatever.
Yeah. So that's why I wanted to ask you, like, where does faith come in? Because obviously, you are at that time still a believer, still going to church and living for Christ, and still hold to the belief of, against abortion, while still fighting those thoughts of having it, because this is just a reality. You went through this. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do. Like, I can't just keep this baby, or even though the truth, but you're also dealing with the truth of your emotions and all that kind of stuff. So you like you said, you pray to God and whatnot, because not everybody probably would fall into those shoes just like you. Even a believer probably would struggle and still go forward with the abortion. You know what I'm saying? But something with you that you decide not to go with it. And that's why I love when you mentioned about that phone call when she told you, I forgot the exact word that she told you, but I'm like, oh my goodness, that is amazing. And that kind of like ring the bell for you. So I guess, what was that key moment of you continuing of like, no, I'm not aborting my child? Like, where does faith and all that?
Yeah, I think when you understand the sovereignty of God, and when you know what the word of God says, like, his word is clear that he turns all things for good. Like, Amen. That's what the Bible says. It says that he works all things for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. And so even my darkest day and my darkest moment, I can still cling to his word as truth. That even in that darkest moment, he is working that for good. And I may not be able to see it. I may not know what it is. I may not know why I had to walk through what I did. I think in a lot of ways, I feel like God really needed to humble me. I know this sounds kind of crazy, but like, purity culture was such a part of my life that I think that I had become very judgmental of people. I was like the Pharisee Christian, I was the Christian person who would judge people for dating, who would judge people for kissing their boyfriends, like judge people for having sex. Huh?
Not to cut you off, but I remember, I forgot what year that book came out, but I remember I was at my first church where I started off, and I remember reading that book. And I think a friend of mine, she got it for me, and she was reading it too because she read it first, and I was so into it, like I was just hung up on it, and then for years, and then then after a while, I just and then later on to hear all the news about him and the book and this, and he stopped it and then he left the faith. I'm like, bro, all of that. But anyway, continue.
That watching his downfall, I don't know, that's been a really wild thing for me to see. But yeah, that book was, I don't think people realize like what a huge role that his book had on shaping Christianity in America. Like his book was the Bible for Christian dating, it really was. And it was this whole, legalistic thing where like, if you kiss a guy or if you look at a guy with lust in your heart, you're like a slut, and it was this thing, and there was so much judgment and condemnation and things like that. And so I think that like, I really used that whole purity thing to like really feel good about myself. It became a source of pride for me where I was like, oh, I'm keeping myself pure and I'm gonna like hold to all of these rules so strictly, and I'm not gonna date anyone. I'm not gonna, do any of these things. And it was like, God just had to humble me, like, and I remember thinking like, oh gosh, like how could any woman think about aborting their own, like how could any woman even consider that, And it wasn't until I found myself in that situation that I was like, oh my gosh, I understand. Like, I understand why a woman would feel like she has no other option but this, you know? And so, I think that God really used the whole thing to just humble me and like, you think that you're this super special, self-righteous person because you haven't had a boyfriend? No, like, your relationship status doesn't make you a better Christian than anyone else. Wow. And so,
that's deep. So speaking of that, legalism and all that kind of stuff, like what would you say to somebody that has that mindset of, the purity culture mindset and all that kind of stuff? Because unfortunately, there's still people who still continue or have that mindset and they don't know that it's actually dangerous. And, what would you say?
I mean, there's wisdom, like there's a certain level of wisdom in what they're saying, right? Like I do believe that God has called us to walk in integrity and to walk in purity and to walk in holiness. But I think that there's a difference of like wanting to walk in holiness and wanting to walk in righteousness and purity out of like a desire to love and honor God versus making self-righteousness and purity become your God, And so I think that that's a really important distinction for us to make, is that we can like exalt, sexual orientation or sexual purity as like this, super like, wow, like you're a less than Christian if you're not checking all of these boxes, and it's like we forget the other side of the coin. Like Scripture teaches, there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus.
Love that
and when we see like, how did God interact? Like, how did Jesus interact with the people who were caught in sexual sin? Like, that would not have been me. I would have been the one throwing the stones. Like I was the Pharisee that was ready to throw the stones at the people who were not as pure as I thought that they should have been. And it was like this whole situation. God was like, nope, like we are humbling you because your self-righteousness needs to die, So as I saw that comment that a Facebook user said, that is so sweet. Thank you.
I agree. So man, so I want you to take me back. Well, I was never there, but I want you to go back, because you were talking about, okay, I don't know, like, how am I supposed to celebrate? Like, I don't know what to do, life is a celebration, but in this situation, like, what do I do? I'm like in the middle, like, yeah, I'm having my child, but it's, because of this. Talk to us, share your moment when you were given birth.
Oh, goodness.
And when you finally, go ahead.
Before I share that moment of when I gave birth, I will say one of the things that I'm so grateful about my dad, especially because he was in the pro-life movement, is he never expected me to keep her.
Wow.
Like my dad came to me and he told me, he was like, hey, Angela, I want you to know, like, you don't have to keep and raise this baby if you don't want to. And my father offered to adopt my daughter for me.
No way. Wow.
Yeah. And it was such a gift that my dad passed away 2 years ago. And so it's like hard for me to remember him sometimes. It was such a gift that he gave me to know that, that he gave me the choice, right? Like he truly gave me the genuine choice. It wasn't like, oh, you're pregnant, so you just got to keep it and raise it forever. No, like he talked to me about adoption. He offered to adopt my baby for me. I have an older sister as well. My older sister offered to adopt her for me. And it was like they gave me options to be able to really make an empowered decision. So like I was able to look at all these different options and say, okay, what would really be best for me? What would really be best for this child? Like, is God calling me to be the parent of this child, or is God calling me to like give her up in adoption so someone else can raise her in a 2-parent home the way it's quote unquote supposed to be? Like I didn't know, but I was able to have the space to really think through that of like being pregnant doesn't mean that I have to be the one to be this child's parent forever. Like their adoption is an option. And so he gave me that choice, but so that was something that he offered to me. And as soon as my dad talked to me about that, I knew immediately within my spirit that was not what I was called to. Like the lady's words from the pregnancy center were just ringing in my ears, like that God gave you life out of this circumstance because he knew that you would be a great mom. And like those words that she said were just constantly ringing in my ears. And so at that point I was like, okay, no, I'm called to be this girl's mom. And so that was when I decided to actually keep her and raise her myself. And so my daughter was actually born 3 weeks early. She was born at 37 weeks. I had some like complications with my pregnancy with her. And so she came early. But I will say that was one of the greatest moments of my life. I don't think that I understood the depth of God's love for me as his daughter than when I gave birth to my own. Yeah.
That's beautiful, man. Like, because I'm now going back to my wife's birth and my first child, and being in the room with her and just seeing my child come out of the womb. Like it was weird because although I was excited for to meet my son and this and that, but the moment that he came out, like I kind of like gasped for air, and I'm like, oh my God. Like it was a beautiful thing, and I didn't know how to explain it, and then obviously my second daughter came, and it was just like, wow. So I can only imagine in your case, given what you went through, and still celebrating life, because it's God who gives life, right? It wasn't another person. It was ultimately God. And you speaking about God's sovereignty, even if you were to have an abortion, God is still sovereign. You know what I'm saying? It wouldn't be right, but God is still sovereign. And that's the beauty of it. When you just ask God and just leave it in his hands, and at the end of the day, he knows what you need. He knows how to take care of you, and he's still doing it to this day with you and your daughter. You know what I'm saying? So that's a beautiful day, a beautiful moment that you had with your daughter. I'm sure you just held her and kissed her and all that kind of stuff.
I did. Yeah, it was like one of the greatest moments of my life, and it was such a surreal thing, because it's like, you go into the hospital as just like a woman, right? Like I went into the hospital as a woman, and it was like I left the hospital with another human being in my arms. And I left as a mom. Like my identity completely transformed in those couple days that we were at the hospital. And was like, I don't know. I just felt like I was walking into my purpose. Like I was meant to be her mom. I was meant to be a mom. I needed to understand what it means to be a parent, to understand the depth of God's love for me. And my daughter, her name is Sophia Grace. I chose that name for her because every time I called her name, it's like a prayer that I'm asking God for wisdom and grace. So every time I call her name, I'm remembering that, okay, I need Sophia Grace. I need wisdom and grace from the Lord to be able to do this well and to be, the kind of parent that God is calling me to be. And my first book was actually about parenting, about being a gospel-based parent, my first book is called Gospel-Based Parenting. And so like really understanding, God's heart for us as his children. I wouldn't have been able to do that without her and having, this experience. And so.
That's beautiful. Man. So you have Sophia, she's 10 years old, but I don't want to get there yet. So you gave birth to her, your father's, I'm sure, loving on her as his first grandchild, right?
Yeah.
First grandchild. Yeah, first grandchild, and your mom, and just loving on you, and you getting the support, Now, was there a moment where the enemy was trying to mess with your head and saying, why would you have your daughter? Like, don't you see who her father is? Like, did you ever have those thoughts come into your mind?
I never doubted having her. I think there was, like, I would have thoughts occasionally of like, my whole life has been changed because of what someone else did to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then to know that like his life was just kind of going on normal. And then now like my whole life is like just been turned upside down, like he's still able to go out and live the single life and go where he wants, do his, like he's able to just be a single dude out in the world. And I'm here, trying to work and financially provide for this kid and trying, breastfeeding and finding just the whole world of being a mom, I'm up all through the night. And there were times that I would think about that. I'm like, man, like, my whole life is about this kid now. I'm having to get up through the night. I'm having to deal with, pain from, having a delivery and all the stuff that goes with recovering from that. And I'm having to do all of that. And he's just, able to live the life that he wants. I think that was the only like negative thought that I had afterwards. But I mean, in the end, it's like a child is a gift. And even as hard and difficult as it is to be a single parent, I wouldn't trade her for the world. Like, she's God's greatest gift to me,
Amen. You mentioned earlier and on that phone call that you just felt that God's peace over you. And I remember, now that I'm thinking about it, there's a book that really changed me when it comes to suffering and doctrine sufferings and whatnot as a believer. And I don't know if you've read it before or heard of it, but it's Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering by Tim Keller.
Oh, I have heard of that book, but I haven't read it. I'm a big fan of Tim Keller, though.
You should read it. It really blessed me, especially because I was still going through death of my father. Just understanding God's sovereignty, like it just changed everything for me.
Yeah.
Because of what you said of how God just gave you that peace over you. In the book, Tim Keller wrote, "Suffering is unbearable if you aren't certain that God is for you and with you." And
wow, that's powerful, man. That's powerful.
Yeah. and you know God was with you. You knew God was with you all along. But sometimes we need like that extra, I guess, confirmation and in that moment, you just felt that peace. And I'm just thinking about this quote: "Suffering is unbearable if you are not certain that God is with you and for you." he was with you all along, and that's
Yeah.
beautiful. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's so good. It makes me want to read this book again.
It
But
sounds
yes,
like a really good, and I might have to read that one as well. Yeah, there are a couple books out there about, you know, like God's sovereignty in the midst of suffering that I think
mhm,
are just so powerful. Like, I don't know how people can walk through darkness without having an understanding of the sovereignty and the goodness of God in the midst of trials and tribulations and hard stuff, you
mhm.
know?
Right. I totally agree. I mean, we see it all out in the Bible. Like suffering is inevitable. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? It's gonna happen. Now, do we want it to happen the way it happened? Of course not. Did you know it was gonna happen that way? Of course not. And I know that as probably as unbelievers, or atheists or whatever, they will be like, "Oh, you see, God is not real. If He really loves Angela, if He really loves you, why did He?" And you're serving Him. Why did He allow that? You know.
Mhm.
But then that takes you back to the Book of Job. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right.
Like God allowed Job to go through all this and all that, and there was for a reason. And you know what? At the end of the day, you may not ever know why He allowed that,
Hmm.
but just know that He is with you. Know that He is sovereign, and know that because you understand that pain, you can probably meet somebody, or maybe you already have, or spoken to other women that have gone through situations like that or similar, and
Hmm.
then you could side with them. You know what I'm saying? And share God's love and God's heart. And that's the beauty of it. Like, yes, as humans, we don't want to go through pain, we don't want to go through suffering. But when you really look at it behind the curtains, and as a believer, we should embrace the suffering in a way and a beautiful way that we can reach out to others that are hurting and that are without Christ so that we may
Yeah,
win them for Christ. That's
absolutely.
beautiful. That's beautiful. That's awesome. So your daughter, she's born. You're raising her. You know, she's 10 years old now. Um, and I know that you mentioned earlier that you didn't want to press charges because you didn't want to have that tie with him and whatnot. So 10 years later, does your daughter is he in her life at all, or does your daughter talk to him? Does she want to talk to him, or does she even know the story? Like, talk to me about that.
Yeah, so that's a good question. When my daughter actually turned 18 months, he reached out to me and he apologized for what happened. And he said that he wanted to have the opportunity to be a part of her life. At the time, my daughter and I, we were living in Georgia. So we were, you know, we were far enough away. Like, you know, he wasn't physically in her life, but he wanted to, you know, talk to her on the phone and things like
Mhm.
that. And I just like, I wasn't sure, I didn't know what to do, you know, like I think there was a part of me that always hoped and I prayed for him for so long that God would like work a miracle with him and turn things around and turn his life around and like convict him of his own sin and
Right.
that God could do something amazing in his life too outside of us. And so when he reached out, I really wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to open the door, but at the same time, you know, I was like, well, maybe if this is God really working on his life, then, you know, praise God if he's changed and he's repentant and wants to change, like, okay. And so at that point, we had agreed, he agreed to pay child support. And he would call her and so he would talk to her on the phone. That was right before like Thanksgiving when she was born in March. So it was when she was a year and a half, like right before Thanksgiving. And so when we came home for Thanksgiving, he actually got a chance to meet her. Um,
Mm.
but during that entire time, even though he had agreed to like pay child support and do all this stuff, and he would call her on the phone, but he never actually like paid any child support. And so I had talked to him about like, you know, if you're gonna be a part of her life, like I want this to be a positive thing for her, and you can't be like wishy-washy a terrible human with her. Like, if you're gonna be like, if God has changed you and you're repentant and you're like saying that you want to be like a better man and all these things, like, okay, we'll give you a chance to prove yourself. But if not, like, I would rather you not be a part of her life than for you to be a part of her life and cause more damage to her. And so we kind of, like, I gave him like time to just kind of see like what he would do and how he would be as a father. And he did not, he paid child support once, and then after that he stopped. He did call her, but he didn't really do anything besides that. And then for her birthday, he didn't call her, like didn't do anything for her birthday. And I was just like, dude, like he's 2, so now she doesn't remember. But I'm like, if she's 9 years old and you don't call your daughter on her birthday, like, that's gonna hurt her,
because she's aware now.
Yeah, and I'm like, now she's young, she's not gonna remember. But like, if you do this when she's older, like, that's gonna really hurt her. And so I just told him, I was like, you know what, like, if you're not like fully ready to be like a good father to her, then like, you need to make up your mind. Either like be a changed man, be a better man, or not. And he chose not to. And so after that, he like didn't reach out to us anymore. Didn't do anything anymore. And then when she was a little bit older, we moved back here to Maryland, and she started asking questions about him. And she said, and she didn't remember that she had met him when she was like a year old. But when she was older, she did ask to like see him again. And so I asked if he would, actually it was the day my dad died. My dad passed away. My daughter's birthday was the day before my dad died. And so again, on her birthday, he reached out and said that he wanted to send her a message for her birthday. And I asked her if she, I told him he could make a video and send it to her, and I would let her decide if she wanted to see the video or not. And she said yes. And so he sent her a video wishing her happy birthday. And she didn't really watch it. Like, she listened to it, but she didn't really watch it. So for her, this was kind of like the first time that she was kind of seeing her dad again, because he hadn't really been a part of her life at all since that time. And then the next day my dad passed away. And I think that was like a big, my dad was like her father figure, because he wasn't really in her life. And so when my dad passed away, I think that was really hard for her. And she had like a lot more questions. Like, she wanted to know who her biological father was. And so, so he was kind of like in and out, but it was very interesting because he, like, I would always ask her, like, how I wanted her to really be in charge of how much or how little she wanted him to be a part of her life. And he would come to like her softball, like she played softball, and he would come to her softball games, and she would always tell me that he made her feel really uncomfortable. She said that she didn't like the way that he looked at her, and I've never talked with her about the way that he was with me. But so I always thought that was very interesting. And so she started expressing that she like did not feel comfortable with him. And so I was like, that's really interesting. Like, she doesn't know anything about how he was. But just like intuitively, she just was like, something about him doesn't feel safe for me. And so eventually she just said, Mom, I think I don't want to like be around him anymore. I don't feel comfortable with him. And so I said, okay. And then shortly after that, his father actually passed away. And then he became a Christian. So weird twist in the story. He became a Christian, and he just got married, I think. It's
like a whole movie over there, but continue.
It's like a whole movie. Yeah. So he became a Christian and got married. But he's stopped any kind of, communication with her, and she doesn't really want to see him either. So that's kind of how that went down. But yeah, my daughter doesn't know anything about like the details. I haven't talked to her about the details around like her conception or anything like that. She knows who he is. She knows his name. She's met him a couple times when he'd come to her sporting stuff. But outside of that, like, she just she's like, nope, God's my dad, and that's enough. So, okay.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's very important for a little, a young child to feel that way, to actually express that to their parents. We have to take and listen to them, and
Yeah, it was
not
very
be that
surprising
type
for
of
me that she
parent.
would say that.
Yeah, and not be that type of parent that like, oh, that's your father. Go da da da. Like, no, if they're feeling a certain way, you need to pay attention to that. You
Hmm.
know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, they
Yeah,
might not understand it, but they feel it and they're expressing it.
yeah. And it was hard for me too, because it's like, of course, I don't want her father to be a terrible person, like regardless of how terrible he was with me, like I still, you know, my relationship with my dad was so wonderful, and it's like we have this
Mhm.
idea in our minds that like I truly believe that God can redeem anyone and anything, and God can work miracles, and God can transform people's lives, and God can turn murderers like Saul into people like Paul, and like God can
Mm.
do great things. And it was like I wanted that for her. I wanted her to be able to have a positive, happy experience with a godly father like I had
Mhm.
with my own father. And so it's weird. I know that there's people who are listening who are probably gonna be like, what do you mean? How could you do that? Like, it's not as black and white, I think, as people make it to be. Because, again, like he apologized for what he did. He said he had become a Christian and changed his
Mhm.
life. And it's like, I want that to be true. I want that to be true for him. And at the same time, for whatever reason, she just didn't feel comfortable,
Yeah.
when she was around him. And so I want to respect her choice. And yeah, so.
Yeah. Wow. Well, praise God that you were that good mom and not force it upon her. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, no, I definitely would
Um,
not.
that's awesome. That's awesome, man. So now she's 10 years old, and you're teaching her the Word of God and teaching her the academics and all that kind of stuff. So where are you right now? Are you how long ago was this that happened? I don't think I asked. How many
Oh,
years?
like the last time that she spoke to him?
No, the incident with you and him.
Oh, well, I
When he
mean, what do you mean? Like when that happened with him? She's 10 now. So that was
oh,
11 years ago.
11 years ago. Okay, pretty much. All right. So wow. Okay. So where are you now? Are you still going to therapy, or do you believe that you're fully healed? Of course, I'm sure you may have some flashbacks or whatever.
Yeah, I do. I think the flashbacks were really bad at the very beginning. I think one of the parts that was like really frustrating for me was like the not remembering pieces. Like that was really, really frustrating. And it was very scary for me that there were these like gaps in my memory that I couldn't explain. Like people would ask me questions and I'm like, I honestly don't know. I honestly don't remember. And
Hmm.
and that was really like frustrating for me. And it wasn't until I was in therapy and I told that to my therapist. I was like, I know that this is going to sound crazy. I was not in my body, and there are large chunks of time that I just don't remember. And my therapist was like, she explained to me that that's a type of like disassociation.
Disassociative. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so she said like sometimes when you go through an experience that's really like traumatic, your brain basically just like shuts off and doesn't allow you to remember like what happened as a way to kind of like do self-preservation or something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
So so the reason why I asked that is because, and what I wanted to ask you is that, think, even though you said you were frustrated because memory or whatnot, but do you think on one side it was like a gift in a way, and it was like a good thing that you didn't remember every single detail of that?
yes. Yeah, I know that sounds weird too. Like I think it is a part of God's grace that he didn't allow me to remember. Um
Mm-hmm.
like I said, like I can still like when I try to remember, I can see things, and there are certain things that will like trigger me. Like
Mm-hmm.
the door slamming, like there was, I mean, it was like years that if someone would slam the door immediately, like I would have panic attacks. I would have nightmares about like things happening for a long time. Like that was another thing that was really hard. Like I would wake up in the middle of the night having nightmares about being raped. Yeah, so a lot of those like lingering effects were there for a really long time afterwards. But I mean, that was 11 years ago. I would say it's probably been maybe like 5 years since I've had like a really big incidents like that where I still have things that will trigger me every once in a while, but it's not nearly as bad as it was at the very beginning. At the very beginning, I was not in a good place. Like I was really struggling. But I feel like I have a lot more peace now. I'm not getting panic attacks like I used to. I can't remember the last time that I had a nightmare about it. So that's good to see, like there's healing that's coming, but every once in a while, like something will happen and it will just trigger a memory or a flashback. And that's challenging, but I don't know. I think it's just kind of part of like the wounds that are with you that just kind of stay with you.
Yeah,
that would be great if one day like God just takes all of that away from me and I never have to think about it ever again. That would be awesome. But in the meantime, I think I'm definitely a lot more healed now, than I was. I'm able to talk about it now without crying. Before I wasn't able to talk about it. That's why I didn't talk about it for a long time. Like it just, I couldn't talk about it. But now I feel like I'm able to, like I'm healed enough that I can talk about it. And yeah.
Wow. And your stance, obviously, we know you are anti-abortion and whatnot. And I know that small percentage of, that people don't want to throw out, oh, but the baby was, want to keep the baby if, you were raped, and you're always going to have that father, that face of father, or whatever the case may be, like, or they believe that abortion should only happen in case of, incest or anything like that. Like, where do you see in that when people say that to you, or when you hear that objection?
I think it's hard for me when people make that objection. Like they try to say like, okay, abortion has to be legal because of rape, right? Like, if a woman is raped, like you have to be able to let her get an abortion. And it's hurtful when people say those things, because it's like, you're saying that my daughter would have been better off dead, that it would have been better for me to murder her because there was a crime committed against me. Like that doesn't make any sense in my head. Like the trauma of rape is never going to be undone through the trauma of abortion. Like adding the trauma of abortion is not going to help. And I think part of what helped me make that decision as well was like, because I had been a part of the pro-life movement for so long, I knew countless. I mean, I was with my dad when he offered counseling to women who had gotten abortions before. And I mean, these were women that literally live with decades of regret. Like they remember the day that they murdered their baby, and they remember every year. It's like, it's traumatic. I mean, every year for decades and decades and decades, they remember the day that they took their child's life. And they live with that constant pain of like, oh my gosh, my child would have been 5 years old. My child would have been, 10 years old. Like my child would have been 2. Like they wonder what their baby would have looked like. And I watched these women over these decades that were dealing with the consequences of their choice to get an abortion. And I'm like, I know that choice is not going to leave me feeling any better about what happened to me, that's not going to take away what happened to me. Instead, I would just be dealing with the trauma of what happened to me, plus the trauma of what I allowed to happen to my own kid, And so, yeah, that argument doesn't really make any sense to me. I don't believe that babies should have to pay for the crimes of their fathers. That's just, I would think that we could like universally agree on that, but apparently that's a controversial opinion nowadays. But
right. Because I think about it, I'm like, man, you're choosing to, and I know again, I'm being, I guess, very sensitive because I'm not a woman. I don't know what that feels like, but it's just like, man, the rapist is alive, but you're choosing your child to be dead. Like,
Yeah.
that's just, it's just rough. Like, I know it's sensitive, it's rough. I'm like, I just can't picture in my mind, like, then he's alive, and then now you don't have the child.
Yeah.
You know, it's like the child is being punished for what happened instead of
Yeah.
the other way around. He should be
Right.
punished for what happened.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So, man, that's rough. That's rough. And given all the stuff that's happening now, and it just, I don't know if you've seen recently, Lila Rose has recently posted like 3 different videos, and the first one was with about, I think, two former abortionists.
I saw that.
So there was 3 of
That
them that,
was
yeah. And the second one, and then the third one really touched me the most, because the second one, I think it was 4 women who all had abortions. One of them had 5 abortions.
Mm.
5 abortions, and then she had her child after that. And thankfully, with no complications, baby came out healthy and whatnot. But it was just it was sad to watch, but I think that was beautiful, because even though they did not know each other personally, the women who aborted their children, and the other side, who were the former people who used to practice, in the medical field too, terminate the babies for them, even though they did not know each other, they forgave each other. They shared a lot of empathy, and I'm like, oh my God, that is like, God's love, and they were just, and one of them was just sharing how it was, because one of them, the other lady, she was also practicing that, but it wasn't until she became a believer. Even as a new believer, she still, I guess, was struggling with it. But she also shared how that it was wrong, because somebody came up to her and told her, and how the Holy Spirit just convicted her and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, wow. That is beautiful. And I'm sorry if you hear my baby in the background, because she is crying like crazy.
No,
but
the parent crying babies.
I know. But yeah, I'm just so happy to share your story. And I know that this is not just your story. This is a story of, other women that has gone through this, and probably even went through with the abortion. So I guess the last question I'll have for you is, anybody who's pregnant, whether it's through rape or just, regular, and they want to push forward for an abortion, what would you like right now, if somebody is listening to this and in that situation, they got raped or not, but they're pregnant and they're struggling, they don't know what to do, or they feel like they can't bring this baby in the world because the world is so evil, or they're afraid of giving the baby up for adoption because the foster care system is just horrible, like so many things. What would you tell that person right now?
I would say the same thing that the lady said to me, that sex does not make babies, God does. And for some reason, God is choosing you to give you a life out of this circumstance. And I would tell you that you are stronger than your circumstances. You are braver than what you could ever imagine, and that you are capable of being an amazing mom. That would be what I would say to a woman who's facing a crisis pregnancy center. You can do this.
Amen. Amen. So I am so happy that I had you on my channel. It was a blessing, and I know that I'll have you back again for the next week. For those that are interested, we're going to be talking about her life as a former teacher and what she's doing now, and homeschooling, and talks about the stuff that abuse in the school system and all of that good stuff. Because we know, unfortunately, there's a lot of a big rise of parents pulling out their kids out of it, so that is awesome. So
Yes.
I got for that, and we'll definitely talk about more about that when we'll have you on, and you guys will know in advance, so I just thank you for being for coming on, on a Thursday night. I'm sure you have other things going on, because you
Oh
do make a lot of videos, and I see your TikTok and talk about in Spanish as well. So that's awesome. I'll
well,
be watching the videos. So that everybody else, thank you for watching. Thank you for the likes. Share it. It's not just her story. It's probably your story or the story of a friend. You're not alone, and God can set you free, and God can have a way for you to either have the child or give it up for an adoption, whatever. As long as you find the right people to, support you and whatnot, and do not believe lies of what's going on in this world, in this generation, um, that it is okay to abort, and that whole, and I'm gonna say it just like this, the whole bull crap of my body, my choice. Right? At the end of the day, God will see that.
Mhm.
And if you choose to have an abortion, it's not the end of the world. You can still receive forgiveness from the Lord as long as you're still alive, and we will come and just pour our hearts. But our plea is that you go forward and find the right people, the right agencies, pregnancy centers that can give you options, the right options, and not just limited to one option, which is terminate the baby. So
Mhm.
again, Angela, I appreciate you. I am I'm shaking right now because it's just like wow, this is a powerful story. So thank you so much, and everybody else have a great night. And I'm about to end the live.